This is not a chance to define what I'm doing wrong. This is a chance for me to describe how I'm going to get better. Underneath that, the foundation of all of it is I have to be humble. Humility is the most important attribute in a leader, and I have to take ownership. I have to take extreme ownership of everything, which is I can't look at a problem and blame other people and point the finger. I have to look at what I've done to contribute to that and how I'm going to solve for that.
Great leadership requires a blend of humility, confidence, and teamwork. Today, we're honored to have Dave Berke with us, a man who embodies these traits through his extraordinary career. Dave is a retired U.S. Marine Corps officer and Top Gun instructor who has seen the front lines of combat in Iraq and Afghanistan as an F-18 pilot. He also served as a Top Gun training officer, guiding the next generation of elite fighter pilots, and as an Anglico forward air controller supporting critical urban combat operations in Ramadi. Now as the Chief Development Officer at Echelon Front, Dave leverages his vast experience to provide unparalleled insights into combat leadership, decision-making, and team building. Dave, really excited to have you here on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
I appreciate it very much, man. It's great to be a part of this.
Well, as our listeners begin tracking their walk with the Strava app, I'd love to jump right in and ask, how have you embraced humility throughout your life, including your time as a leader, and approach every situation with a willingness to learn?
Well, dude, you're jumping right into it, man. You're getting to the ultimate topic of humility. Listen, I can't tell you that I was given some natural gift of humility at birth. I think I probably went through the same life cycle and continuum that all of us go through, which is our egos. Our humility is the biggest challenge. But certainly at some point in my career, I figured out, and I think I was lucky enough to figure it out a little bit sooner than most, but I did figure it out that my ego, if I didn't keep it under control, was going to cause a real problem for me. And I saw that my ego start to create issues for me pretty early on, even at the basic school when you're just learning how to be a Marine officer. My ego was getting the best of me, and I was causing problems with the relationships I had with other people because I was arrogant and I was overconfident. And then another thing happened throughout my life, certainly flying airplanes, you figure out that there's always someone better than you. And I think when you start to see the detriments of lack of humility and the recognition that you're not as good as you think you are, over time, humility starts to seep into you. And if you embrace it, it can be a really, really wonderful, powerful thing to help you be even more successful. So I learned at some point I'm not as good as I thought I was. And when I acted like I was better than I was, it caused problems for me. So I learned a little humility throughout my career.
That's kind of the journey, especially of young Marines. You go through some of the best training in the world. You're serving along some of the most elite people. And then when you go the fighter pilot route, you're then stepping it up even that much more. And it's really tough to remain humble as you're building that much confidence in your abilities and seeing how fast you're growing and progressing.
It's so true. I mean, you already said it. I think the word I kept thinking of in my mind as you're talking is the idea of balance. Is you can't be passive. You can't walk around meek. You have to have confidence, not just flying airplanes, not just in combat on the ground, but really in every aspect of life. You want to go into a situation, even the hard situations, things like landing on a boat. I don't want to be insecure about landing on a boat at night. I want to be confident in doing that. And even the things we teach at Echelon Front, everything, there's a balance. You have to be confident. You can't be cocky. You have to be humble, but you can't be passive. And so I think the real challenge with everything you just said is threading the needle of that confidence and humility that doesn't overshoot and become either debilitating where you're just overconfident and cocky and way too comfortable, or you're so insecure that you don't feel you can do it. And neither one of those extremes are bad. So it's a constant setting of balance on humility and confidence in everything.
I know that when walking into a room, especially when you're supposed to be the subject matter expert because you're some form of combat veteran and fighter pilot, like how do you walk in a room and strike that balance?
Well, like I said, and I think it's somewhat connected, and I know you're familiar with this, but if you do anything long enough, you begin to figure out there's already somebody if not better than you, there's always something from somebody you can learn everywhere. And I've yet, literally in my entire life, and I would never expect it to happen moving forward, that I know more than everybody about everything. It's just simply not the case. And if you can tell yourself that you've got something to learn from everybody, what you start to do is build the habit of walking into an environment, even one that maybe I'm the instructor, I'm the teacher, I'm really the center of the day. That you got something to learn from somebody else, you walk in open minded. And honestly, my belief on that is that open mindedness becomes a habit. If you start to build that mindset that I've got something to learn, or I can't wait to hear what somebody else has to say, or I'm looking forward to learning from someone else, you start to build that as a habit. It becomes your default. And so rather than walking in thinking, oh, I'm the man here, I've got things to tell other people, you walk in, even when you're the primary speaker, anxious to hear what other people have to say. And that open-mindedness, once that becomes a habit, it really helps with humility. It helps with all those things, but it really helps set a framework by which you're there no matter what the role is. You're there and you're going to learn from other people or learn from the experience. It's such a better way to go through life than thinking you're the man, which is a terrible way to think and act. And you can build a habit by which you stop doing that. And I am fortunate enough to have learned to be open minded in every situation, that I've got something to learn from somebody everywhere, literally everywhere.
I'm certain that you've carried those qualities throughout your entire Marine Corps career. I mean, you don't get invited to be a Top Gun instructor without having some of those qualities and willingness to learn. Because, I mean, as you're well aware, being a teacher requires this continuous learning process. And so, are there any moments that really stand out during your time in the Marine Corps that helped you really develop that mindset?
Yeah, you talked about Top Gun, and that to me, certainly from my flying career, was the ultimate manifestation of what you wanted to achieve as a pilot. It really represents the pinnacle of Navy, Marine Corps fighter aviation. It's something deep down we all want to find a way to be a part of. But the path to get there is nothing like anybody might expect, certainly early on in their career. When I went through Top Gun as a student, I had this idea that the instructors were like superhuman, that they were perfect. And the thing that was pretty remarkable for me going through as a student, well before I was asked to come back to be an instructor there, was I'd go do a flight with an instructor and I'd, be in awe at how well they flew the airplane and how well they did on the flight and how good their performance was. And even in the debriefs, they were highlighting all these mistakes, all these flaws, all these little errors. And I was kind of shocked at their ability to identify and recognize mistakes that I didn't even notice because I'm just watching them thinking they're doing everything right. And it really started to become noteworthy to me that the best instructors there, listen, all the instructors are really good. I don't mean to diminish that. But the thing that was remarkable about their ability to teach, which is what you just alluded to as being the most important thing, was how well they could identify their own shortfalls, not just find out what was wrong with me, which as a student is super obvious. It's the things that they didn't do right. And it was really very fascinating at the time to see that these instructors were talking about their own mistakes, which I thought really was just one of the most humble things I had seen. Because in my mind, they could have said, I did everything right, and I would have agreed with them. It looked like they were doing everything right. And so even long before I came back to be an instructor to really start teaching at Top Gun and then ultimately became the training officer, the senior instructor, it is ingrained in you that the whole point behind that is there's no such thing as perfect. You're not even close to perfect. Even the pilots that appear to be doing it better than everybody else, they're making countless little mistakes. And the best instructors, the best teachers, the most humble ones are the ones that are able to and comfortably identify what they've done wrong when it looks like they haven't done anything wrong. And that, to be quite frank, is an attribute that's every bit as important, if not more so, than your flying skill. And so the thing that's most remarkable to me about my experience at Top Gun is, as good as they make it look, what's most amazing about it is that is a place where all you're doing is talking about your mistakes. That's all any of us do. The instructors, the lead instructor, the students, you're just talking about what you could do better. And it's pretty remarkable because it's nothing like you might think it is until you get there. And so when you see the best pilots in the world talking about what they're doing wrong, you can't help but absorb some of that humility yourself. So that really was the pinnacle for me of recognizing there is no perfect. There's no such thing as perfection. It's a complete lie. And the best teachers, even at the most amazing places, are talking about what they've done wrong really the entire time. It's pretty cool.
As you're sitting there talking about, pointing out the things that we can improve upon. Because I don't even necessarily want to say like these are the things that we did wrong, because while we're doing, we don't necessarily consider them wrong. It's just like, oh, okay, well, that right there is something that I can tweak and make even better, so that we can do this process of continuous improvement. Can that ever become to the detriment of the individual that's looking at themselves?
Yeah, you got to be careful with that. And I think that's where that balance, and Danny, I love that question because it really leverages on the previous question you asked. And I think it's pretty cool the way you're doing that. It's obviously a really cool thought that you're having, which is that can be debilitating and overwhelming if you don't strike the balance in the other direction. That humility cannot turn into being passive and insecure and thinking, oh, wow, Danny, I came back from this flight and I made 13 mistakes that I've identified. Wow, maybe I shouldn't even be doing this, or maybe I'm not good enough for this anymore, or maybe you should go find someone else. I cannot allow that to happen. And so the balance is I want to be humble. I want to be open minded. I want to be willing to recognize those shortfalls. But the goal for that is not to determine or somehow measure my own quality. It's to, oh, this is a chance for me to get better. And then all of a sudden, that long list of little errors, those little mistakes, those small little deviations aren't things that become debilitating. They become really empowering, which is, oh, this is a pretty small mistake here, but I notice that I can get better next time. And that humility blends with the confidence. And so we have to be careful that it is not debilitating and not overwhelming. And the way we do that is this is not a chance to define what I'm doing wrong. This is a chance for me to describe how I'm going to get better. And if I do it really well, other people will benefit that. And so maybe if I'm with you, you don't make the same mistake I did and you get better, and I can take some real strength from that too. So it's that same comment we made earlier, is that constant striving for what that balance is. I certainly can't overshoot in the cocky, I'm perfect, just look at me. But I don't want to overshoot another way too, which is, wow, look at all those mistakes. I'm really not good enough to do this. I can't let that happen either. So it's that constant looking for balance there. And I think I've always tried to find a way to make that happen, no matter what the level of the mistake is.
That's really insightful. And I mean, the time served as a fighter pilot, so much of that training from my understanding, I mean, this is from the corpsman side on the Navy that deployed with ground units to Iraq and Afghanistan. Um, from what I understand about fighter pilots, when you're in that phase of your career, it's very much about your performance, about your ability to handle this $1 billion piece of equipment, fly along with a squadron. But you also had the opportunity to then take leadership and lead troops in actual ground combat.
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
I look back on my 23 years in the Marine Corps. Almost all of it was flying. I got to fly some of the coolest fighters in some of the coolest settings. Hornets off carriers in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, flying F-16s at Top Gun, and F-22s at the Air Force, and hovering in F-35. And I look at all these things I got to do in an airplane, and they are amazing. I cannot believe that things worked out the way that they did. I spent 1 year out of the cockpit, and that year leading Marines on the ground was by far the most impactful career leadership experience that I ever had. And you know how Marines feel about their corpsmen. I look back on my experience there with the Marines and the corpsmen that I had in my unit as by far the most challenging, but also seminal and important experience of my career. I left Top Gun. And I joke about this. I left Top Gun as the senior instructor, as a training officer, Top Gun. I'm pretty sure at the time I was driving a Corvette. I was living a pretty cool life. And the next thing you know, I've got an M4, a radio, and I'm in downtown Ramadi, just a few months later. It was a massive contrast. You could not go from, one extreme to the other. And it was certainly the ultimate leadership test too. I'm super grateful for that. But that experience in Ramadi, and we already have a little bit of overlap there in our time there. And I'm sure we could share some experiences. Was unlike anything I ever did in an airplane. And it's not to diminish or marginalize those fighter aircraft experiences. Those were amazing. But there was nothing like leading Marines on the ground in combat, enduring some of those trials that we did during that time in Ramadi '06 that I can compare it to. There's nothing like that.
What inspired you to make the transition to become a ground unit during Iraq, like in Iraq during that time? Because like a lot of people may not fully realize, obviously the initial invasion occurs in 2003, and that was a very chaotic time for our military. And then it wasn't really talked about for a few years until around 2006 to 2008. which is when it really started to become kinetic again because there was the insurgency really started to pick up in that part of the world. And when you have the choice to go to combat on the ground or not, a lot of people, they want to be base support. They want to be away from the firefight, but close enough to say, "Hey, I was there."
Well, I have to be careful with recounting this because my wife can't stand this story because it took a lot of volunteering to get to where I ended up, shooting my rifle in combat, which is something I never really anticipated. But to be quite honest, I joined the Marine Corps because I wanted to be a Marine. And you, as a corpsman, understand that about Marines. There's an irrationality to being a Marine that I think connects all of us. And I put you in the same category, even as a sailor, as a corpsman. You got to want to be a Marine to be with Marines. And there's something about that. And listen, undeniably, as a young kid, as a young teenager, I got it in my head at some point I was going to be a Marine, and I wanted to be a Marine. And the path took me now to joining the Marine Corps. I very quickly was selected after I got in the Marine Corps to fly airplanes. So I went to Navy flight training, which the Navy and the Marine Corps does together, which was awesome. I selected into a squadron at a Miramar that was a carrier-based squadron. So I spent 4 years flying as a Marine, but aboard aircraft carriers. I did, a trip to Iraq, a trip to Afghanistan off an aircraft carrier. Then I got selected to go to Top Gun to be an instructor, which is the Navy's fighter weapons school. And I wouldn't trade any of those things, but I found myself, 10 years, 11 years after joining the Marine Corps, and I had this nagging sense of I hadn't been a Marine the way I envisioned it. Now, I didn't want to spend my career as an infantry officer or as a grunt on the ground, but I had this strong sense that before I left the Marine Corps, and I had every expectation that after Top Gun I was going to leave to go do other things, is I felt like I needed this uniquely Marine Corps experience. And so based on that internal, somewhat irrational drive to have this unique Marine Corps experience, I volunteered for a unit called Anglico. And that Anglico unit, which was actually based in Japan, were sending volunteers to go to Camp Lejeune. And then I volunteered for that. And then I was fortunate enough to dictate where I went. My best friend growing up was in Ramadi in late '05 to early '06. I knew exactly what was going on there. And the way he described it was what was true. It was like, this is where the war is. If you're going to go to war, this is where you need to be. And next thing you know, I found myself leading an Anglico team in Ramadi in 2006. A lot of that driven by that sense of wanting to look back on my Marine Corps career and having a uniquely Marine Corps experience. Ironically, I ended up working with a bunch of Navy SEALs for the Army, so it didn't happen exactly the way I envisioned. But I certainly saw the side of the Marine Corps, that little piece about the Marine Corps that was so intriguing and so compelling to me that when I looked across the services, more important than being a pilot, more important than anything was I wanted to be a Marine. And that stayed with me my whole life. And that's what drove me to that Anglico forward air controller tour in Iraq in '06.
I just I did not know much about the military other than the Navy because I came from a Navy family. My dad was in. Apparently, I had grandparents in, my aunt, my brother, all of that, and I joined the Navy as an airman, and it was the most boring job ever because I was stationed on an LPD as an airman, which is a 17-person team, and we only landed helicopters.
Yeah.
And it was so dull and tedious. But one of the cool things that they had was a Marine embark officer, and he was a staff sergeant. He saw that I was bored. I was getting into a lot of trouble, and I got sent to go work with him as a punishment. And I absolutely loved it. We PT'd hard. We took care of the troops when they embarked upon us. We made sure that they were fed and that they had all the supplies that they needed to run the missions. And I thought it was the coolest thing. And so in 2004, I volunteered, and I was very inspired to go serve with the Marines out here in Hawaii because it's Hawaii. Um, but what was that drive for you? Because you said you always wanted to be a Marine. I mean, that the idea of being a Marine is so tedious and so arduous. It as the elite force for out of the services, at least during that time. What was it that had you moto to go?
Yeah, I got to be not too long-winded on this because it's kind of the story of my upbringing, which is I got no military background, no family members, nobody anywhere. And then randomly, when I was, I think, 6 years old, my parents moved to a town called El Toro because my dad opened up an office somewhere, like totally unrelated. And El Toro was the home of the Marine Corps' fighter base, back and this was in the late 70s. And that base is long since closed. But at the time, Marine Corps Air Station El Toro was the home of all the West Coast Marine fighters. So as a little kid, starting from about 6 years old, I lived about a mile from the flight line, just randomly. And I'd spent my entire life looking up, watching the planes take off and land out of El Toro. This was, F-4 Phantoms, A-4 Skyhawks, A-6s, and then, around 83, the Hornet shows up, and I was going to air shows. And so being around a Marine base and being around airplanes definitely got into my blood. I won't lie, when Top Gun, the movie Top Gun comes out, I look at that, I'm like, I'm going to land planes on boats. That's the coolest job in the history of the world. But I had been around Marines enough, and this is picture, through the eyes of a little kid, 6, 10, 12, 13, really influential period in your life, that when you look and see something and it's enamoring to you, you can't get it out of your system. You have no real control over that. And I just had this sense about the Marines, the way they looked, the way they talked, their uniforms, all those sort of things. And at 16, I'm working for Target. I worked at Target to pay for my car insurance and my gas, and ended up working through Target all the way through the time I got commissioned. There was a Marine there, and I'll say his name because his name was Aaron Irvin. He was a staff sergeant in the Marine Corps, and he worked there on nights and weekends to make a little extra money. And he was the biggest, toughest, baddest dude on the planet. And I looked up to him. I put him on a pedestal. He ended up becoming a massively influential figure in my life. But he knew about my love for aviation. And he's like, hey, man, the Marine Corps flies fighters off carriers too. And once he helped me make the connection that I could fly jets in the Marine Corps off boats, I'm like, that's it. And so by 14, 15, 16, I was just dead set. I had some inspirational people in my life, him being one of them, that I felt like if I could be a Marine, I could be anything. And if I could fly fighters in the Marine Corps, then I could fly fighters anywhere. Now, listen, that's just the viewpoint of a little kid. This isn't to create some, inter-service rivalry, but that's how I felt. And I was going to be a Marine come hell or high water. And that's what I wanted to do because of the people around me that I looked at. I just couldn't help but put the Marines on a pedestal. There is something unique about the Marines. And it's undeniable when it gets in your blood.
There's something about the healthy competition. I still have to correct people when they say, "Oh, you were in the Navy, so you must have been a sailor," and I was like, "Yes and no, yes and
yes,
no."
Yeah.
I was like, I tried the Navy, I sampled it. So a little healthy competition is always good, But throughout your career, you had an opportunity to teach leadership. Obviously, teaching some of the best pilots in the world how to fly even better is great, but it's also about the leadership that you're going to train. And then as you grow up in your career, you continue to teach leadership and mentor people. What are some of the key lessons that you want to make sure that your mentees and students walk away with?
Yeah, I mean, something that I learned, if you look back, certainly growing up and even early in my career, the pursuit of being a fighter pilot was a very singular self-serving. I wanted to fly fighters. I wasn't thinking early on in my career about the need for leadership and the need to lead as a skill or a capability. But certainly once you get into the Marine Corps, very quickly they teach you and really instill in you the thing that drives you towards leadership, which is it is about the team. It is not about you. And you could do what I did, which is a single seat fighter. You're by yourself in the cockpit, all these images of you being the singular focal point. It is not about you. It is exclusively about the team. And despite whatever inspiration you have moving in the direction of wanting to do the things that I wanted to do, it takes very little time for the Marine Corps to remind you there are things much, much bigger than you at play here. And so the understanding that your ability to lead is every bit, if not more important than anything else you do to contribute individually. And it's also your pathway to success. The concept of leadership being central to what you're doing starts very, very, very early in the Marine Corps. Once you get past the screening process, once they get a sense of whether you're capable and competent, Are you going to be a Marine officer? It's going to be about your Marines. It is not about you. And one of the things we say at Echelon Front when we talk about leadership, it's all on you, but it's not about you. And I really appreciated and enjoyed and understood that. And then I think embraced that responsibility of my success is going to come from the people around me being successful. And once you figure out that other people success is how you individually succeed, I mean, I could talk all day about everything I did in an airplane. I couldn't move an airplane 1 inch if it wasn't for dozens and dozens of other people and all the work that they do to allow that to happen. And so leadership becomes embedded in you as the most important thing you're going to be a part of. And then I think what's also really, really important that maybe often gets overlooked is that leadership is a skill. You're not bestowed with good leadership. Earning the title of Marine doesn't naturally make you a good leader either. Leadership is a skill that you have to learn. It is taught in the Marine Corps. I have learned it. I teach it. It's something I practice every single day, but it's a skill that every single person can learn. And the cool thing about that is that because it's not some sort of God-given talent you just naturally have, it means everybody can learn it. And it doesn't really matter the environment you're in or who you're with. It's a skill that can be taught, it's a skill that can be learned, and it's probably the most important skill that applies to every aspect of life in and out of the military. Leadership is essential to anybody's ability to be successful, and I was so lucky and so grateful to be in an organization and work with all the services as much as I did, that the premium placed on leadership and the understanding that leadership is the difference between success and failure, that became so much more important in my career than flying the airplanes by myself, which obviously was the start of that pursuit, but by no means the end of it.
Yeah, it's that double-edged sword, right? Like when you're junior in the military, whether it's officer or enlisted, you get to do really cool stuff. And then as you gain rank, it's like the office then becomes your home and you're watching everybody else do really cool stuff. And the military is really, really good about training us up in these leadership stuff because I mean, I know for a lot of the times when you're starting to dabble in this realm of leadership, you're emulating people. You're saying, hey, like look at the way that this guy does that, and you're taking on that posture. You're becoming an actor as a leader. But a lot of civilian personnel, leadership is something that is praised, and you're stoked when you find a good leader amongst your team. But when there's not these training opportunities to teach somebody how to be a leader, like the military invests heavily in, how do they go about acquiring some of these skills?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. The military doesn't have a monopoly on good leadership. There's good leadership everywhere. And you know as well as anyone, the military is not 100% perfect leadership either. We have all sorts of challenges and good and bad leadership in the military, just like you have everywhere else. But it is undeniably the focus and the investment in leadership definitely exists. And I was thankful enough to, there's formal schools, there's informal training, there's that mentor mentee role modeling, just like you said, where you're just watching other people and saying, I like that, I don't like that, I'm going to do that, I'm not going to do that. And so the concept of leadership is certainly central to your military experience. One of the things that's so cool about what I get to do now is more and more organizations, whether they're civilian, private sector organizations, even in families and communities, are starting to recognize that the behaviors and attributes to make you successful in business are true everywhere. And so you've got this concept of military leadership, which to me is not a good term because there is nothing unique about military leadership. It's just good leadership. If you're a good leader in the military and the things you do that make you a good leader in the military work everywhere else. And you could be a bad leader in the military, and the things that undermine your capacity as a leader are going to cause problems for you elsewhere. So leadership is the same everywhere. Yeah, the environment is certainly different in, carrier aviation and combat. There's some magnification of the situation, but the attributes and behaviors are all exactly the same. And now I get to be in a position to say, hey, listen, my military experience might look unique on paper because the environment's a little bit different, but the behaviors, the mindsets, the things you do, the things you think, the things you say, they're exactly the same thing. Leadership is leadership is leadership. And so now you can take private sector companies and families and say, hey, we're going to build good relationships. We're going to be good communicators. We're not going to let our emotions get the best of us. We're going to help our people learn and get better. That works everywhere. And so the universality of leadership is a thing that I appreciate the most, which is I can take my military experience and I don't have to talk about it like, oh, I'm different or special. I get to talk about it in the exact same breath that everyone else might talk about their life, no matter where it is, what they're doing, or what industry. It's all the same stuff, man. Leadership is leadership. It works everywhere.
I love that, and part of it is teaching. It's learning how to handle different types of pressures. I mean, I remember, my day job, aside from this podcast, is to serve as an advisor for some high level individuals on their communication teams. And I remember when I first started, I used to get anxiety heading into it, and I still get a little bit level of anxiety as I'm preparing for an important meeting or leading a workshop, because it's just you don't know the people that well. You haven't sat there and built the rapport. And so I have a few things that I do before stepping into a room. But I want to learn, what do you do to handle these fears and anxieties or different challenging moments?
Yeah, the word anxiety. I mean, if I think of the things that I've done have created anxiety, I mean, I had hundreds, I mean, literally hundreds and hundreds of carrier landings, and I was never not a little anxious ever doing that. And it's funny because my our company Echelon Front, we are leadership instructors. It's cool because we're not there as motivational speakers to tell some story. We're there teaching from a curriculum, but you're in this situation where you are going to be the primary communicator, and I've done it thousands and thousands of times. And before any environment that I start to communicate in and talk and train to, I still get anxious. And I think that's, it's largely a very positive thing. I think part of it's your brain telling you like, hey, man, you got to be on your A game here. You need to do a really good job. This is important. But I still get that feeling. And so the first thing I would say is if you're getting anxious, that's a good thing. That's your body telling you, your mind telling you, this is important to you. This matters. This is an important thing to be paying attention to. So I think that's a really positive thing. I learned to embrace that anxiousness, those little nerves. I learned to embrace that as this is an important thing. Pay attention, work hard, do your best, all those things. If I ever felt the concept of, complacency or routine sneak into combat or carrier, that's a bad thing. You don't want to walk up to an airplane thinking, well, this is no big deal. What's the worst that could happen? I don't even need to try. You don't want that. And so I love the idea that just thinking about being anxious is a good thing. That's your body telling you this is important and you care. So start, I think, is embracing that. And then think about, obviously, the management of that too. Just like everything, there's a balance of that. I don't want to get overwhelmed by that and get debilitated where I can't function and I can't operate. As I think about, okay, what I'm about to go do, this is not just important for me, this is an opportunity to help other people as well. And I think that repetition, like with everything, it is a skill to practice over and over and over again. And over time, you build that confidence. But I love the idea of always having a little bit of being anxious, a little anxiety, a little bit of nervousness, just a little, to remind you how important this is. I love that that's still resident. I love that I still feel that. And I think that's something people should embrace. That's a really good, positive thing. Not something to shy away from or run away from. It's something to accept and use as an advantage.
That's a great perspective on what anxiety is and how we should respond to it. I know some of the most challenging times for service members is that transition out of the military. Whether you prepared for it or not, there's a lot of unknowns that you're heading into. You're getting advice from 80 different people who don't know you personally, who don't necessarily know your life situation, but we're all navigating a difficult transition during that time back into civilian life, especially when we've joined at such a young age, right? What was your navigation like back into the civilian sector?
Well, my personal experience is probably not the best case study because I feel like I got lucky and hit the jackpot. The day I told the Marine Corps that I was going to retire was actually the same. I had to decline command. I was selected to become a colonel. I was selected to go back to fly the F-35. So I had a path that was presented to me that I was seriously contemplating, and on the same day I declined promotion, I declined command, and I submitted for retirement. It's a pretty big thing. Like, hey, and I had no. My wife and my family, we had talked about it. I had no job. I had no contemplation of what I was going to do. I just knew that I was going to do something else. On that exact day that I did that, Leif Babin, the co-founder of Echelon Front, someone I worked in Ramadi with, a former SEAL from that was in Iraq, calls me. He goes, "Hey, we're starting this company. No idea what's going to happen with it, but I think you'd be a really good fit. You want to join me and Jocko and do this?" And so I'm given this opportunity that I had no anticipation or no preparation for. And that's what I've been doing ever since. Now, I don't want that to be like, hey, look how great it worked out for me. The lesson that came from that wasn't just that, I'll take the good luck opportunities where they come. And those are really great opportunity for me. Was what they provided me, what they presented as the opportunity was a chance to do something, albeit very different from what I was doing, something that I believed in, that I could contribute to, something that had a mission that was important to me. And I think I'm really glad you talked about the advice. Everybody's got advice for everybody else. And I caution people, try not to give too much advice and try not to listen to too much advice, because that's their personal story, their personal anecdote, their personal sequence and experience. But if there is some advice or some lesson I've learned from the transition and how hard that can be is, first of all, do whatever you want. Do whatever you want in any industry, in any location. Do what you want, but do something that you believe in what you're doing. And so as I put the hierarchy of the things that matter, where you're going to do it, what you're going to do, what company you're going to do it for, how much you're going to make, there's all sorts of questions. And they're all important questions, especially you got to provide for yourself or potentially provide for your family. I think the thing that is the most important thing for any transitioning veteran is you have to believe in what that mission is. Now, it might not be that the work itself is the most important thing, but I believe in helping leading teams and mentoring younger folks to whatever it is. You have to have belief in what you're doing. There has to be a mission that you believe. And if you can embrace that, the rest is so much easier. But if you take a job that looks good on paper because it's in the right location, it's got a cool title, maybe the pay is what you were looking for, and you don't believe in what you're doing, it's just a matter of time before you run into a problem. And I think the biggest challenge for veterans is we leave an environment where belief in the mission doesn't have to be questioned. You don't have to wonder, is what I'm doing important, and do I believe in what I'm doing? It's almost guaranteed. That's the hardest part to replicate. And so as you're out there exploring what's next, don't worry about the industry. Don't worry about the type of job that you do. It could be any number of things. If you believe in that, you are going to be successful. And if you don't, you are very likely going to struggle. So belief in that mission, it's not going to be the same. You're not going to be a Marine. You're not going to be a sailor. It's not going to be the same. But the belief in what you're doing can be the same. That is the pathway. That's the only advice I would offer is believe in what you're doing, and then go do it however you want to do it, and don't worry about what anybody else's experience or anybody else's advice says. But if you don't have that belief in that mission, whatever it might be, you're gonna struggle. And I see that unfortunately a lot. Is there's a lot of veterans gone from this incredible experience to something they just simply don't believe in, and that's not a good recipe.
That is such great advice. I hear you on make sure that you recognize that people's personal anecdotes are their anecdotes. It's what worked for them, because everybody's situation is uniquely different. Unless you've been walking with that person for a long time, they have no clue what it is that you're going through, or what it is that you need. Which is why our transition program is so robust and potentially ineffective. When you're sitting in a classroom for a week, because they're trying to cover the entire gambit. And when you're trying to be something for everyone, you're nothing for anyone, uh, except for a few select. Uh, I want to go back to that transition, and when Leif and Jocko asked you to be a part of their team, because I mean, we say that now, and it's like, oh, of course, you want to go be a part of Jocko's team. Like it's one of the biggest freaking teams in the world at this point, so well renowned. When you were being asked, not so much.
No, and that's true. So, I mean, we're talking, this is 2016. There was no Jocko podcast. Jocko wasn't even on social media. And at the time you probably ask him, he was like, what would we do with social? I don't need social media. This predates all of it. This predates, the company existed, Echelon Front, and the book Extreme Ownership, which really has launched not just Leif and Jocko, but all of us that have been lucky enough to be part of that. It really predates the preeminence of all those things. And so what we have now is nothing like what it was. I mean, this was an over-the-phone handshake agreement with no guarantees and no commitments. The reason it was so easy for me to make a commitment to two people and to a company that essentially, all things being equal, like it didn't really exist, certainly not like it did now, was because I knew them. And I knew them in the most violent, the most challenging, the most demanding, the most difficult, the most important thing I ever did. I went to Iraq in 2006. I happened to show up same place, same time as a SEAL team called Task Unit Bruiser. Leif, Jocko, and I did every major operation together. I left that deployment that fall, September, October. They went back to their SEAL team. I went back to my F-18 squadron. I had never seen or talked to Jocko other than like a little reunion party in 10 or 11 years. It had been 10 years. But I knew who those two people were at their core. These were good human beings more than anything. They were great leaders. But I knew that because of the strength of the relationship, that the thing that matters the most, belief in who these people are, belief in what they're trying to do, and trust and the strength of the relationship, it made that very, very easy. Now, again, I was very fortunate enough, but the calculus for me wasn't, okay, what's my title going to be? How much money are you going to, those weren't even questions I was asking. It was, what are we doing? Oh, we're going to take the lessons that we learned that have been captured in the book and help people learn those lessons so their lives can get better. I believe in that. I don't know what it's going to look like or what I'm going to be doing or how I'm going to be doing it, but I knew I believed in that, and I knew I believed in them, and it made that transition very easy. And to your point, I had no sense of what we were going to become, certainly not the prominence and the notoriety and the reach that we have now. It's remarkable what has occurred in 8 years, but I didn't have that to make that decision. I mean, somebody says now you want to go work with Jocko at Echelon Front, you're probably going to say yes. But what I had was, to me, was infinitely more important, which goes back to the previous question, is I knew them as human beings. I served alongside them in the most brutal environment ever, and I saw how they were. These are amazing human beings doing the right thing in the most difficult situations, and I believed in the mission they had, which was to take these lessons and help other people learn them. That was essentially it. That was the nature of the conversation. I knew who they were. I understood what they were trying to do, and they wanted me to be a part of it. And as they say, the rest is history. But the things that really matter, the belief in what we're doing and who we're doing it with, that was covered 100%. And that made it easy. I'm certainly grateful for how it worked out, but I had no idea. None of us knew. There's no guarantees it was going to be what it is now.
Well, and now you guys help develop some of the world's best leaders. Period. Like we'll stop there. You just help develop some of the world's best leaders. What are some of the key factors in creating these winning teams?
Well, you probably already know them. It's the stuff we talked about before and all the questions you've asked. And yeah, I mean, it is who Echelon Front is interacting with, who we're training and working with, who we've gotten a chance to reach, and the millions of people that have read the book that Leif and Jocko wrote and what we do as a company. It is remarkable. But on the other side of that, and how unique and amazing that is, there's a ton of simplicity in what we do. A ton of simplicity in what we do. Because the recipe, the framework, the foundation for what we teach is the things that you learn, rudimentary leadership things, which is one is, first of all, you have to have good relationships with the people around you. You have to care about the people around you. It doesn't matter what your role is. Your job as a leader is to care about the team. Now, that not necessarily the person in charge of the team. Everybody has to care about each other. And if you don't have good relationships, none of this works. And that's such a central lesson to the military is when you go to combat, we all love our country. We all love America. We all believe what we're doing. But if you're in my fire team, you're the person I care about and most connected to, and the person I'm going to be willing to make the most sacrifice for. If you and I don't have a good relationship, I don't care how well trained you are, this is not going to work. And so we teach the foundational principles, which is, we call it cover and move, but it's taking care of each other. It's understanding the team is more important than you, and you got to contribute to the team. We talk about good communication and making sure people literally understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. We talk about working on important tasks because there's always too many things to do and not enough time to do it. And so you better not let your emotions get the best of you. You can't fly off the handle and get emotional and get frustrated. And you got to empower your people. We teach it. Cover and move, simple, prioritize, execute, decentralized command. And as simple as that sounds, that is the foundation for all organizations to operate. And of course, underneath that, the foundation of all of it is I have to be humble. Humility is the most important attribute in a leader. And I have to take ownership. I have to take extreme ownership of everything, which is I can't look at a problem and blame other people and point the finger and attribute to something else. I have to look at what I've done to contribute to that and how I'm going to solve for that. And that's literally what we teach. Now, we teach it in all sorts of different unique ways, but ultimately it comes back to those things. Be humble, take ownership, and apply those leadership principles. And your team whether it's your company, your family, or even just yourself, they will improve and get better. Problems will get solved, and people will grow. And it's remarkable how well it works if you apply it. Of course, it's easier said than done. Humility is not easy, but if you can be humble and take ownership of things, you can solve problems, and people around you will benefit from that. That's it, man. That's what we do.
I know that we wouldn't be able to do what we do if we weren't taking care of ourselves first. When we talk about caring for people, it's so important that before we can care for people, before we put on our neighbor's air mask when the airplane depressures, we have to put ours on first. It's so important why this discussion around mental health has been happening, especially in our space. We see so many veterans struggling. After the military, especially with their mental health, there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of anxiety, as we already discussed before, and we start avoiding things, or we start engaging in destructive behaviors, which leads to our detriment. What have you noticed in your profession, the impact mental health has had on performance and leadership?
Yeah, I love the story there in the lead in, and even that anecdote of, when the oxygen mask falls down, they say put your mask on first before you put it on the person next to you. And metaphorically, it's 100% accurate. And listen, man, nobody understands better than you all the things that you've talked about. All of us, directly or indirectly, have been touched by this. All of us. There's almost no veteran out there, almost no veteran out there that's been in combat and come home, what the country's been through in the last couple of decades, that can't directly or indirectly understand what you're talking to. And I love that there is a grateful, engaged nation out there that absolutely there's so many incredible resources, and so many more than when we first started, that's out there to try to help people through this. But I look at this like everything else. In one sense, this is an unbelievably complex, deeply rooted, challenging thing that it is so hard to address. And in the exact same breath, there is some simplicity to this that I really want people to embrace. And when we talk about health, mental health, taking care of yourself, we have some of the simplest answers, which is things like, you have to rest. You have to sleep. You have to be well rested. You have to eat good and healthy foods. You have to exercise. You have to undertake activities, things like sports, jujitsu. You have to do these things that in some sense seem so rudimentary, that seem so easy, but often they escape us. And it's things like, hey, get a good night's sleep, get up early, go to the gym, work out, go get some fresh air, go for a run, go surfing, go down to the beach, go out, take a little bit of hike, eat good, healthy food. Surround yourself with people that have these same habit patterns, and engage and embrace in activities that are going to promote the body and the mind's health, and the spiritual health too. And my intent here isn't to simplify this like, oh my God, this is so obvious. The reason I want to present this in this simple way, not just because it is somewhat simple in a lot of cases, is hang on, these things are doable. We can all do these things. It's not to diminish and marginalize how hard some of the challenges are, because we all know how hard that can be. All of us understand that. I've personally dealt with that and seen people deal with it. But if I look back and go, hang on, can I get up early? Yeah, I can do that. Can I avoid these things that are bad for me? Junk food, alcohol, yes. And can I do this instead and have good, healthy food and build good, healthy habits? When you present it to those folks in a little bit more simple way, they can go, oh, I can do some of those things. That's actually not as hard as it seems like. And that can make such a massive contribution. And then if you find yourself realizing, oh, I'm going to surround myself with people that do the same thing, what I've come to enjoy and appreciate that I get to be a part of is there's a massive community out there of people that can not just do the same things you're doing, but also appreciate when you're struggling. When Danny's getting up, exercising, eating right, healthy, doing all those things, that seems straightforward, but he's still having a rough day, I can go, hey, dude, what's on your mind? And I can be there for you in a way that I can appreciate, not in a judgmental way, that when you're, off the path a little bit or off the wagon a little bit, I can and understand that. And then we can go back and forth and lean on each other. And so I don't want people to look at it and think that, oh, this is so obvious, it's so simple, it's not even a hard thing. That's not what I'm saying. But there are some such simple things that we can do that can make massive impact in our lives. And if we can start to build the habit of doing that, we start to look around and go, oh, I can control some of these things. I don't have to be victimized by these external forces and pressures. I have more hope. I have more optimism. I have more strength. And then I have a community that feels the same way. I want people to recognize that there's things that we can do, we can all do that aren't as hard as they feel sometimes. Also, knowing there's some incredible complexity to this, an incredible depth and challenge to this. Uh, and there's amazing resources and help to be had there, but I can also help myself in some very easy, simple ways.
That's fantastic and absolutely true. Being on this journey for the last 13 years of recovery from alcoholism and PTSD myself, uh, there's still things that I'm learning today. And I mean, I was just on a call with a group of friends that I've known for the last 3 or 4 years. We experience similar struggles. We chat with one another. We offer the best life anecdotes we can and point people towards the resources that are needed and available, because there's so much that's available. But we all recognize that just because we're doing the right things doesn't mean that things always feel easy. But recovery is very, very simple, but that does not make it easy. It's still very hard.
Yeah. I mean, that's the ultimate anecdote. It is simple, but not easy. And I don't want anybody to ever mistake those two. Those are two very different things. The stuff, same with leadership. It's simple, it's not easy. Everything in life, the answer is simple, it's just very hard to do. The wonderful thing about the simplicity of it is if we can take a deep breath, if we can detach and take a step back and look, we'll find a couple of things and go, oh, I can do that. I can do that thing. And that simplicity is there to help us get back on that path and do the right thing. It's not intended to diminish the challenge and the difficulty of doing it. But oftentimes, when things are given to you in a simple manner, you can go, "Oh, that's not as complex as I thought it was." It gives you a little bit of hope, a little bit of optimism, which sometimes we're grasping for. But I think you said it perfectly. It's perfectly stated. This is simple. It's just not easy.
With all of the mental health struggles that our first responders, our veterans, our service members, even active duty current service members are facing, a lot of them are losing the battle and they're dying by suicide, unfortunately. What message of hope do you want to bring to somebody that's currently going through their own battle?
Yeah, it's such a heartbreaking topic, because in so many ways, all the things we just talked about, despite the knowledge of all those things, you and I both know that there's still just this incredible struggle. And I think I sometimes almost imagine it like you can get shrouded in this darkness by which every direction you look, it is dark. And if you feel like you're in this scenario by which whichever way you point, whichever way you move, whichever direction you decide to go, there is no light at the end of that. And so you feel like you are surrounded by this by which there's no way to get out of. And all that it takes is for someone to shine a bit of a flashlight in one direction, whichever direction that might be, to help them see, oh, there is some light over there. And I think the comment of simple, not easy still applies here. I don't mean to say how easy this is. It's very hard to do. But when you see a little bit of that light and you can embrace that, one of the things, this darkness that we sometimes feel, this trap that we fall into, which is, I know this darkness, the most amazing thing about embracing that darkness and acknowledging, yes, this is a dark period, a dark experience, a dark time, is that helps you understand and appreciate the light so much more than other people who might take that for granted. And if you can find your way and navigate through that darkness towards some of that light, some of that goodness, some of that positivity, you can end up on another side of that going, I know darkness as well as anyone, which means I can appreciate this light so much more. There is no light without that darkness. And rather than get shrouded and overwhelmed by that, maybe you can recognize, oh, this is the pathway to get me to understand and appreciate how much opportunity still is there, how much more I can contribute, how much more I still have the chance to do, and try to embrace that. Any sliver of light, whether it's you find it yourself, someone shines it for you, a friend, a teammate, a former unit mate, someone you heard on a podcast like this, if there's any way to shine a sliver of light and reach someone, embrace the fact that you're in that darkness, because that's going to help you understand how good the light is And if you bring them towards that, there's opportunity, there's a chance to help them see that, and that gives them a little bit of control over their life. There's nothing worse than that feeling of I can't control anything, I can't do anything, I can't fix this, there's no hope. But boy, if you get a little bit of that in your life, you can appreciate that so much more. It is those tough, dark experiences that we had that help us understand how good these other opportunities experiences are, and other people don't get that. And so even inside some of that negativity and darkness, there's so much goodness inside there. If we can help people find a little bit of that, it brings them towards that. They have so much more control than they feel like they have. It can help them see things in a way that nobody else can see them. And that's a really powerful thing. I think it's part of the reason why what you're doing is such an important thing, is to help these folks go, hey, come over here. Come over here. Let me show you what it looks like over here. And then all of a sudden they see something they've never seen before, which can be the difference between life and death. It can change everything.
I really appreciate the illustrations that you drew there between light and darkness. We teach people the reason why it's so important to talk about these things and use that word suicide directly with people is because it is a darkness. And what can't hide in the darkness is light. So when we shine the light in that area, the darkness then gets filled. The smallest amount of light getting in, telling one person what you're going through, can immediately start to brighten it. And then we start to learn that by expressing those hard feelings, we also find we have deeper desires, and we can start expressing those. And those are the things that have been holding us back. And thank you for that illustration, Dave. I really appreciate all your time here. And I want to make sure that our listeners know where they can find and connect with you.
Well, listen, I appreciate it more than I can say. I love the chance to be on here and talk to you about this topic, and just talk a little bit about leadership in general. If anybody wants to find me, just go to echelonfront.com. If you're really, you could also just Google Jocko. We're all on the same team and on the same company. So we're definitely fortunate enough to be out there and have a good footprint. But honestly, there's resources out there that our company provides in a whole range of things that can help, not, certainly not just veterans, but definitely we are huge advocates of the veteran and first responders space, and super grateful and an understanding of all those challenges and all that darkness that's out there. And so our company truly, truly believes in that. If you're interested in that, just go to our website, echelonfront.com. But in the end, I'm grateful to be part of this, man. Thanks for including me. Thank you for what you're doing. And for everybody out there that served, that has experienced that darkness, what you just said, man, that shining that light can't, I'm sorry, darkness can't hide from the light. It can't. You turn that flashlight on, you turn that light on, and darkness goes away. It's that darkness that helps us appreciate that so much. So you illuminating that darkness, I think it's such a powerful thing, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for your time here today. Thank you for all that you and your team at Echelon Front do. So thank you again for coming on the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast.
Right on, man. Thank you.
And for our listeners, remember, you can also catch the 1 Mile, 1 Veteran podcast on Reese Across America Radio, ready for you on platforms like iHeartRadio, Odyssey, and the TuneIn app.